Good evening. I have jokingly said to several people who have commented on the DVDs, which Renat so kindly made for all of you, that perhaps you need more to do with your lives if you can sit down and watch 3 hours of a DVD of me writing things on the paper. I did put our last session's paper all across the back wall. It is not up here because we're not going to hash over every little piece of it. There are a couple things that I heard in a different way than how they were said, and I just want to bring some clarity to that. And one of them was the comment of a climate or an attitude of mistrust and distrust over 20 or 25 years. Now, in light of what we were talking about, I've heard that as that mistrust or distrust being towards the power of the office and anything above the congregational church, the bishop, the difficulties with the seminaries, just some of the hurtful things that happened at a higher level. And I don't know if I misunderstood that or not, Kathy, but other people heard it as being part of the actual congregational culture, that people didn't trust each other. And I just want to clarify that when I wrote that down and made a line through the whole thing and wrote it in this report, I was doing it in kind of in light of that sense of distrust to having other people come in and telling you how to do your business. Would you like to clarify that for us, what your intent was? Right, Kathy.
I wouldn't say it would be amongst the congregation, but maybe towards people in authority.
Okay.
To anybody that has the authority in the congregation.
Okay. So a little bit within, but really
yes.
the bigger picture. Okay. I feel better about that. Yes.
I think that's right. I think it's a function of leadership.
Okay.
And it happens in business all the time. People mistrust leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I took it when it was said.
Okay.
And that's how I have seen it for years in churches and in business.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And the connection I made was with your pointing out the pattern of secrecy in certain areas, that was what has led to that at times.
Okay.
Because something wasn't being, you felt something wasn't right, but you didn't know what. And that leads to this sense of
Okay.
dis-ease or suspicion.
Or a suspicion that things are being done that we don't know. Yeah.
Okay. That would be that key point of that suspicion that things are happening within and among your congregation, your congregational leadership, sense of perhaps even outside your own congregation in a collegial way with other clergy in the area, bishops, whatever. That lack of clarity alone doesn't create that mistrust, distrust, but the lack of clarity paired with the secrecy that's been part of this history clearly could add to that sense of mistrust or distrust. Is there any other point that anyone wants to just make sure we attack again without rehashing the whole 60 years? Because really the big question is, okay, what do we do with this? Where do we go from here? Is there anything, anyone? I don't want to steamroll over anybody. Yes?
One thing, I don't know where it began, but there was lay people helping with the liturgy more. And Norbert Muller, that just died, he was one that would get up there and sing the part of it with the pastor. And then there were some women, Nancy Sims, who is gone from here, but she was one of the first row that would assist the pastor with that.
And when did that happen?
Well, it was probably began sometime before Halberdier left. I don't have a book in front of me and didn't take time.
I'll bet you with the green hymnal.
What?
I'll bet you when the green hymnal came around,
Well,
some of that started.
probably. But that was one thing that I thought of afterwards, that there were lay people that help assist.
Now, you are saying that in the past tense. Are there lay
Well,
people
no,
assisting
there were
now?
then, yeah,
Okay.
there are now,
Okay.
but, that was when it started. I'm sorry, I said that
Well,
wrong.
that's all right, I just wanted to be certain that, you know, that there wasn't then a cutoff of that kind of participation from the lay leadership. Okay, where are we gonna go from here? What do you do with your history after you look at this big picture, this panoramic picture, which I actually am looking right at, but is behind all of you? What do we do with that? Where do we go from here? We have to look at a couple of questions that don't really have definite or clear answers, but give us an opportunity to share with one another and come up with some ideas, some places where we might have a jump start, some things that could be helpful to us as we move forward. This is not visioning. You have that process going. You've done a ministry audit. You're doing so many great things. We aren't trying to replace that, but rather, what can our past teach us? What can we look at? And the first one I want you to tackle with somebody sitting near you. This time I'll let it be your spouse, if that's what you want, but, you know, we'll mix it up a little bit. But what trends or habits has this congregation used in times of celebration? You have 2 minutes. Talk to somebody near you and see if you can come up with any trends or habits that you use in times of celebration. So, let's have a few of those ideas, a few of the patterns, habits, trends this church has expressed during times of celebration.
Fellowship.
Food.
You know, for Lutherans, it's always food and coffee. Music.
Communion.
Socializing.
Besides the fellowship and socializing, I think my experience in the 7 years of whatever celebrations is this church really tries to get a lot of people involved. It's not just a few people doing the celebration.
I've used my marker a lot since the last time I was here. Anything else?
When we had our 100th anniversary, we invited our pastor,
Okay.
the bishop.
You celebrated history.
Celebration of Easter and Christmas. We're always encouraged to bring people.
Anything else? Okay, same question. What habits or trends or patterns do you see in yourselves during times of challenge and stress? Go. Talk to the people around you. Okay, some patterns, trends, habits, things that rise up in this congregation during times of challenge and stress.
Questioning.
Questioning?
I think divisiveness, dividing into groups.
Secrecy.
We call that polarizing, when you divide in groups.
Withdraw.
Secrecy.
Secrecy.
Thank you, Ted. All right, secrecy.
They're so rare.
I got really hung up on polarizing, so
Pulling
let's
together,
mark that I so that we know he corrected my spelling.
pulling
Okay.
together.
Okay, pulling together, there was something after secrecy that I missed.
Withdrawal.
Okay, thank you.
And to some degree, people sitting on the sidelines.
Gossip.
Accusation.
Growth.
Accusations. All right, I'm caught up.
Scapegoating.
Blame. Scapegoating or blame. I did spell it right. Okay. Next.
There's a whole bunch of positive things that happen with trend and stress. And
Right.
We're kind of
Right.
talking.
Pulling together is one of them.
Leadership is another.
Oh, I thought, yes, absolutely.
That's there, and fellowship isn't up there that tends to happen in a time of stress. Embracing change change is a part of, that causes stress, but embracing it is a positive part of the stress that takes place.
And often, that's a really key point, and often, like in our Healthy Congregation series, we learned that when we're in a time of challenge or stress, that's often the catalyst for a very healthy and positive change that we're looking for.
Right.
At times of stress, we tend to fall back on our roots, or those core things that,
Okay.
help make us who we are.
Okay, just because it's in red doesn't mean it's negative stuff. That's
That's why
it's just when we do stress and challenge in the back, it was in red, so I thought I would follow through with that.
I think there's been a serious search for a resolution or for
Reconciliation or solution?
a solution or.
Growth. Spiritual growth.
Is the lack of information also lack of clarity? I don't know who said that.
Sure.
Yes.
It must not be just me, but it appears that those things that do not have the plus signs
Mm-hmm.
are what cause the stress.
Thank you. Want to join me up here? Often, when we are in times of stress or challenge, these things get in the way. The scapegoating, the blaming, the defending, the denying, the explaining. Those things become problems for us and increase our stress. They aren't they aren't the issue or the topic, excuse me. They're not the topic. They're not the reason that we have suddenly found ourselves in a time of challenge or stress. But our behavior leads us to kind of pick up some of those bad habits, those negative habits. Now, we're a church, so we also draw on what gives us strength. Our leadership capabilities within the church, we pull together. We look for a solution. If every church folded in a time of challenge or stress, this country would be littered with empty church buildings. Yes, some churches do have to close their doors for a variety of reasons, but it is not always some incident that caused that. It might be a long change in the demographics, it may be a financial issue, maybe, we don't know. I mean, as many churches as have had to close their doors, there's that many reasons why they came to that position. But it is important for us to look at some of those positive aspects of our life together during times of change, which can also be trends, habits, and behaviors of ours in times of celebration. We do some of these same things. We pull together. We celebrate leadership, fellowship. First thing over here, but fellowship is also part of our times of struggle. When there's and there is one tomorrow, a funeral of a long-time, much-loved member of the congregation, we gather to eat. We have fellowship. We share with one another. We visit one another beforehand. That's part of a stressful situation, yet it's an important part of who we are as a congregation. That embracing change. Crisis can be that catalyst for something that brings change. We fall back on our core values. We remember who we are. We have prayer. We search for solutions. We have spiritual growth. We remind ourselves of that groundedness that is part of who we are. Did you have a question on the sheet? Is there something on there that you were wanting to clarify?
No.
Okay. Okay. So anything else that you want to add, both as a positive growing edge during times of stress or challenge, or something that may get in the way of our spiritual groundedness during times of stress and challenge?
You know, as I look at the positives there, when we look at pulling together, embracing change, spiritual growth, searching for solutions, all of those things seem to emanate out of strong leadership. The source of those things seem to me to be our leadership.
In a healthy congregation, which is the goal here, is to get to attain the greatest level of health possible. In a healthy congregation, leaders do take a position and they stand with clarity on the position they've taken. They make I statements, they clearly bring that body, that group, to a point of trying to understand, trying to find that solution. And you are correct that these other elements don't happen under stress without leadership. Whether it's pastoral leadership, lay leadership within the congregation, you are right.
Joan,
Yes.
I think I agree with you on pastoral and lay leadership, but I think it's congregational leadership. I just think there's a sense of people stepping up at a time of trends and stress, that it's not maybe who you think is the leadership, but it's just, I think it's part of the DNA of Trinity, of just some synergy. All the negative things happen, but then there's a lot of positive things that happen that move us through that happen from within.
And when I define leadership, I look at past, present, and future leaders, which includes our youth, and I look at all persons interested in the life and growth of the congregation. So in my mind, anyone participating in events for Healthy Congregation, whether it's the Healthy Congregation series, whether it's looking at our history, people who take that interest, I consider leaders of your congregation. So to me, it is not, when I say leaders, I'm not talking elected or appointed persons, but all of those who have taken that interest in the life and growth. Tammy?
You just made me think of one thing. Our vacation Bible school this year was 2 weeks after the big crazy event that happened. And our teenage kids that were leading, they were just right there all the time. And that's a great example of that.
And that's a great example, but you know what? I think the impact on youth is a real important aspect of both celebration and times of stress and challenge, because they're our future. And we need to care for them and the climate that they're feeling within the church. So I like that, so I'm going to put VBS and youth, because it's such an excellent example of looking to those future leaders and helping them transition through a difficult time.
They were helping us. That's
Well,
what I was saying.
but you know, we're helping you.
They were.
They needed help too.
I mean, we all needed it, but boy, they were, they had a job to do, and if it were up to some of us adults, we would have gone, we can't do this right now, and we.
And they did really help you, but the fact that you all put
Right.
together and did it created a climate for them that allowed things to move forward. Excellent. Yes, Larry.
Larry's point, I think, is a good point. I think of trends, stress, challenges in the life of a congregation like I do in individuals. What I call the valleys of our life, where we have significant emotional events, and what do? We turn to God. And go to God for those answers. And I think out of that comes those pluses that you're talking about up there. But it's not just one person, it's the entire congregation that needs to do that, and I think normally do.
So that's that piece, that pulling together and becoming one as a congregation during times of stress and challenge. So does this change when you look at this group? Group of words, does it change how you feel about this first section? Take a minute or two to reflect on your life and growth here during times of stress and challenge, and see if anyone comes up with anything else during the celebration period of your lives. Take just a minute to talk to the people around you. See if there's anything we've missed over here. Yes.
Well, we probably need to move leadership over to that left side also.
Thank you. That's the whole purpose of me asking the question again. Say it again. He wanted me to put leadership in this list too.
I personally think that we celebrate poorly too as a congregation.
Okay, well, we'll get to that, but.
You're ahead of this.
You're ahead of me, but.
Sorry.
Always. But it could be.
Yeah.
It could be that the celebrations, the welcomings, the beginnings, the endings are not all that they could be. But because we looked at leadership as being a positive and driving force during times of challenge and stress, we also have times of celebration, and if we are going to address leadership as all of us that care about and love the congregation, and we look at it as a congregational responsibility, that leadership piece, then it also has to be part of that positive side of our lives. Okay? Everybody agree with that? Ready to move on? Okay, what?
We've got two, one in each column, and they're
Okay.
related to the same thing. Certainly in trends and celebration, it's worship and praising God
Okay?
for the good things that have happened. And likewise in the trends, the stress and challenge is reminding ourselves who we are as Christians and hopefully calling us to be bigger than our sin nature and step forward and be a part of the solution rather than a problem. Remember our commonalities as family of God.
How about who and whose we are?
You know, Joan, another one on the celebration, I think, is celebrating lives. Tomorrow, we're gonna have a funeral, but it's really a celebration of Norbert's life. And I think we do those well. That sounds kind of funny, but
It does not sound funny to me. Most of you knew this already, but I lost my sister in December, which is why Ted initially came alone and almost immediately had to come back. No one could have fought harder than my sister for 8 years. She was positive, she had excellent quality of life. Every day was a reason to rejoice. Every day was a reason to thank God for life. And would you not agree that it was absolutely a celebration of her life when people gathered? It was, yes, we all are sad because she was way too young to not be with us. But the celebration was for all of those wonderful gifts that God has given during our lives. And it does not sound odd to me. And hopefully in the church is the one place that we can always celebrate the gift of life, even at the end of life. So, excellent. Okay. This goes now back to we don't always celebrate as well as we could. How do we function in times of celebration? How do we function? How is our ability to carry that out? Okay? Take some time to talk to the people around you. You may have to branch out and talk to different people if it's getting stale. How do we function in times of celebration? There you go. How do we function during times of celebration? Anybody have any input there? Yeah.
We're worried about offending versus being inclusive and celebratory of what's going on.
You're not celebrating the right way. You're not celebrating the right way, or I think
Get the wrong music?
our attitudes of how we're going to celebrate are different, and I think that polarizing comes back in a little bit too, and how we do it as a community. And
So it limits what you might do because you're worried about offending pieces, so you don't maybe do as broad a celebration as you might be able to do.
How are you about celebrating your diversity?
We're not.
I think that we sit back on the sidelines because of that, because we're worried about, I think that he's right, we're offending people, we're worried about hurting someone's feelings.
Have you gotten to, in healthy congregations, any of you who are doing that, have you gotten to the point where you talk about taking the temperature before you act? Or do you even do that? That's one of those pieces. That's one of those pieces that I really like to look at, because if we are taking the temperature of the group, if we're checking and thinking about how everyone's going to react, and that keeps us from acting, we're not really being effective in our leadership.
Exactly.
We already know that John Brown and Mary Smith are going to be really, really angry, so we're not going to do it. And we do that in churches a lot. I'm sorry, but we do. Where, we kind of look at them as being leaders. I hope there's no one by that name here. We kind of look at them as being leaders. And so as we're taking the temperature sure we're checking the climate and we know they're going to be upset, we may reach a point where we don't move forward in a positive way that would celebrate our diversity. Of course, we have people that prefer different styles of worship, different types of music, different activities. You know, the person who wants to come for a very serious Bible study or a group study on the Augsburg Confession is probably not the same person who wants to organize a square dancing event. And yet, a church can have a wide range of activities that can be celebrated. And when we all gather for a single worship or a single event to celebrate, it's important for us to recognize that all of those people may be present. And that's okay. It doesn't have to go down one particular path in order to keep everyone happy. Did you have something to say? I feel like the words are about ready to come out.
Yeah. I'm ovulating. Right. No, go ahead.
Okay, well, just jump in when
I
you're
will
ready.
jump.
You're ready to say it. Yep.
And maybe it does fall under struggle with diversity, but we have an unwillingness to accept other people's desires, their other people's styles, and so on and so forth. And I guess it falls in that category. But even to the point of, as you've already put down there, where when we talk about a celebration, it's almost impossible to come up with something that's acceptable.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
We just are unwilling to accept that other people think differently than we do. Can you believe that?
You still make your decisions about celebration.
And the important point is there's many we's.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no singular we.
No.
Right. So I just didn't use a pronoun at all. Before I knew anyone here, before I knew any names, and I still don't know very many names, but before I really had talked to anyone, I was standing outside the office and there were people working on making copies and stuff. And I can't tell you now who was making copies and running things off and getting things ready. But I just asked this very generic question about whether you had different styles of worship, traditional worship. You call it contemporary worship, but whatever we're doing today is contemporary. So, a praise worship and a more traditional liturgical worship. And the person who answered me said, yes, we do, and it's first on the sign, even though it's not the first service of the day. Which told me volumes. I do, but that told me volumes about that individual's preference. But as we celebrate our diverse worship styles, they can all be part of who you are. People can have preferences, that's okay. But that was just one of those things where, and sure enough, I looked at the sign outside it.
Yeah.
It does.
Yes.
But to say something positive, we have had combination services.
Sure.
Where we had the choir, we had exaltation.
Okay.
And we combined everything, and they were wonderful.
Okay.
But the issue with that is, one, those of us who plan it always worry about what we're going to hear afterwards, and then but then we also just trying to please everyone and waiting to hear, and having to even think about that when you're planning a celebration is just too bad.
Well, and that's why the word decisions is here. Because it isn't that you can't celebrate together. The struggle is on that planning end, making decisions, trying not to offend anyone. I don't even know what I was going to write there. Try to please. Okay, that is right. Again, back to healthy congregations. In that very first anxious congregation, responsible congregation, one of the topics is change in worship style. And the council president, I think it's the worship committee chair, and he's saying, all I'm trying to do is make a plan that doesn't offend anyone, doesn't cause anyone to leave, and makes everyone happy. And I always want to just shout at them, good luck. You know, it's not part of how we function as individuals, how we function as a group. Because we don't all want the exact same thing. It just doesn't work that way.
And does that grow out of a fear of, I mean, my feeling is that it grows out of a fear that what I like is going to be lost. If I even show some acceptance to a new style or a new whatever, that what I like or what I'm doing is going to be lost in that. And it seems to me that it's more of a fear of those things than actually a dislike of anything new. I mean, well,
I think that's part of it, but I also think your history as a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod plays a role, because you do have people worshiping within your midst that are, dare I use the word purists, in terms of the Lutheran confession and the rubrics that are part of the Lutheran tradition. So moving into a different form of celebration in terms of worship may feel like or seem like it's being watered down and threatens that very purist approach to the Lutheran tradition. I'm not saying that is what's happening, but I think you probably have hit on a chord there. We all have hot buttons. And for that individual that wants that very traditional, very liturgical service, talking about contemporary worship can be a real hot button. Doing 40 days of purpose can be a real hot button, because it's a different, kind of a different fork in the road. And when anxiety is up, that's when we have that difficulty of trying to keep everyone happy.
So what we've done there is lost focus. What is the focus of the celebration? Is it the kind of music? Obviously not.
Well, if
We have lost focus on the main thing.
But if we take our focus off the mission, we're always in trouble. So, yeah.
Isn't the success that we would have in functioning in celebration directly proportionate to how much we learn from the stress and challenge side?
Probably, but our functioning, our trends are more basic behaviors, that lower level of thinking, that reactive behavior. So in celebration, yes, it's reactive. There may be some planning in it. The trend is just what we do. But if we look at our functioning, we're really trying to get a handle on what is our best behavior during these times? How do we actually process? Our presence and functioning is the most important thing we have to offer one another. Not necessarily our reactions. So if we can grow out of this to have a healthy presence and functioning, we can look at some of these issues, the divisive or polarizing events, and we can move beyond that. If we're learning, maybe we can get to a point where instead of polarizing or not being inclusive or worrying about the 11 o'clock worship or the 8 o'clock worship, whatever the other one is, instead of worrying about all of that, if we are feeling strong and healthy in our presence and functioning, something can be fashioned and put together to celebrate us in all of our diversity, to celebrate who we are, knowing we have different preferences.
That's why I like to see the word learning over there under stress and challenges.
Okay.
That's a good one.
There it is. Excellent point. Yes?
I'm having a hard time identifying with this, because I've been to a lot of celebrations at Trinity over the years, and I always thought I was having a good time.
And you probably did.
Now you know, Charlie.
I would suggest that directly to the decisions or the planning,
The plan.
not the actual event.
Once we get to it, it's all okay. It's all-
I truly think your actual event during celebration is full of food and fellowship, fun, socializing, togetherness, engaging with one another. I think the struggle for this congregation in celebrating well and your functioning to lead you up to that celebration, it is a challenge in your planning, in your decision-making, in your inclusiveness of all the different styles that are preferred within the congregation. But once you're at the event, it's great.
I have heard from a few people, the last Christmas concert, celebration, whatever, upstairs, you do this, and, you know, like, it's still during Advent, but it's a Christmas thing. And I heard disappointment, some things about it, that it's like it either wasn't what it was, or we're struggling with trying to somehow incorporate police all, not all. I just heard, I don't know, it was fine to me, I liked it, I had a good time. You know, and in a sense, that's part of it. Once things happen, it's a good time. But there was still some disappointment. Oh, I guess I'm seeing blank stares, so I don't know what that means.
No, you're not.
I'm wrong.
You're not seeing blank stares. We're agreeing with you.
They're agreeing with you.
I was wondering if that was a chord, though, that resonates with what Joan's talking about. You know, it's like, yeah, we are able to celebrate, but sometimes right now with a certain diversity, it's a little challenging to make that planning happen. Is that an event that illustrates what she's talking about? Maybe that's my question.
Absolutely.
And if so, what about that event that illustrates it?
Well, if you don't have somebody performing in it, people are tending to say, oh, why go up there this
Okay.
evening?
Okay.
You know, and that's gonna happen as we get bigger and bigger. But, you know, when you think back to where everybody's family was involved in it.
I would, if I could, I'd like to take a little piece of what you just said, and I think size is part of the functioning during celebration. Because you, in effect, have these multiple congregations that meet at different times. And just like all of us kind of, well, maybe you don't all have this, but I grew up wishing that I could have a church picnic like Little House on the Prairie, where absolutely everybody was there, they all had a wonderful time, and we were all celebrating the same thing. And I went to a very large church with 3 services. So anytime you did anything, it was at whatever Sunday school hour you were in. So it was never all. And size does affect how we function when we celebrate. If you were not the size you are, you would not have enough people to drive the different styles of worship that are part of your culture here.
And I think regarding Christmas, we're competing with the secular world on dates and being pulled in all different directions.
Yeah, that's probably true as well.
That I would see as the main thing that is a reason the Christmas concert isn't what it used to be.
So if we look at worrying about offending others and polarizing and not always being inclusive, if we look at those aspects that affect how we function when we celebrate, can we, for 2 minutes, brainstorm about what we can do to change that part of our functioning? Can we choose a different pathway to make those things happen? Talk to one another, go. Try to move us beyond this point. Doesn't mean it has to happen right now, but it's a challenge. To be a healthy leader, I just sent him out to get my 4 words because I could only think of 2. But calm, challenge, focus, and change. Those are nice, strong elements that we can use to move beyond our functioning when it's not providing us with the best possible foundation. Any ideas from this group as to how we might move beyond that?
Well, I'll say what I said before, and that is, we're not focusing on the celebration.
Okay, focus.
We have lost sight of the main thing.
So when we're planning a celebration, whether it is a celebration of life, whether it is a specific Sunday, that focus is always part of our mission, which is the proclamation of the gospel. And then there may be a special event, whether it's the resurrection, the crucifixion, the birth of Jesus, whatever. But that's the focus, not who likes what. Right. So those words I just gave you, focus.
You know, maybe focusing not on me, but we or them. And when I put it that way, it's not about me, and it's not about we. It's about, part of this might be about those that aren't even here. And those celebration events are sometimes wonderful events that have become welcoming events.
Right.
And so, you know, it's not about me and it's not about we, but it's about God's mission. It goes back to that focus.
Right, right. That focus is all inclusive. Yes?
See, I keep thinking of, it's kind of like history repeats itself, and somebody is, my first thought was behavior modification, and then I got to thinking about repent, turning around. The responses that are happening and have been happening have to stop. There has to be a change, and everybody has to stop responding the way they did, or there can't be any change. Everybody keeps going in the same direction.
So we're back to those aspects of healthy leadership. Focus, calm. What happens if we're calmer in our decision making, if we're non-reactive? Calmness is just as contagious as anxiety. You haven't had a lot of opportunity to experience contagious calmness, but when we are living out our healthy practices and principles, and we are functioning with calmness, keeping our focus, that has a ripple effect. It is contagious. We just are people, and we're used to the anxiety whipping us all into a frenzy. But the calmness is just as contagious. Challenge. And when we talk about challenge in this light, we're challenging ourselves. We are challenging us as a congregation. Challenge is a good thing. When we're trying to make everyone happy and we're trying to be everyone's comforter, it doesn't work very well. We're never going to make everybody happy. So challenge is part of that picture as well. Focus, calm, challenge, and change. Change can be a good thing. Does change mean we let go of our heritage, we let go of our past? No. Change is just a way of reframing things periodically to create that event, that time, that celebration, that worship that has the focus we're all looking for. If we can look at those elements, we might begin moving past some of these behaviors that are part of our functioning during times of celebration. We can have a better celebration if we can move past that worry about who's going to like it and who's not. That's that taking the temperature. And as healthy leaders, which you all are, that's one of those things we try to be aware of. Does that mean you won't do it? Of course not. We're wired that way. We worry about offending people. But we try to move beyond that and look for the greater good. If the celebration is for the greater good, someone might be unhappy, but you know what? They're probably an adult. It's probably an adult member of the congregation who has to make a decision for themselves. And if they're not comfortable participating in the celebration, maybe that day they go to a different worship service. It's not all bad. We want to be inclusive, but we still can allow people to make choices that work for them. How do we function in times of stress and challenge? How do we function in times of stress and challenge? This one's not such a leap because y'all came up with all sorts of ideas over here. And my favorite word during times of stress and challenge is anxiety. And I don't know about all of you, but when I'm highly anxious, I'm not who I want to be. My tone of voice is sharper. I may not be as kind and cheerful as I would like my family to think that I am. When we went to our first parish, I really wanted to be the young wife and mother of beautiful children, the wife of everyone's favorite pastor. It didn't work that way, and my anxiety was always sky high. And what I found myself doing was being very, very hard on the children. My expectations of their behavior was not appropriate for their age. But I was so kind of driven to have everybody think we were the perfect pastor's family that my anxiety brought out a not so great side of me. Now, maybe none of you have had that experience, but my guess is everyone in this room has felt anxiety, and everyone in this room has found words coming out of their mouth that they maybe wished later hadn't come out of their mouth. And that's part of what we do when we're anxious. The gossip, the blaming. But those are behaviors. I want to look at functioning, which is more, again, not necessarily the reactive behavior, but the bigger picture, the choices we make. How are we as a congregation under stress? Are we welcoming?
Yes.
Do you think you were welcoming under stress?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's and I would echo that because I think you were under stress when Ted came. I think you were under stress when I came. And you guys are great. So there's that piece there that you can rise above. Your functioning allowed you to rise above the immediate challenge. Let's be really creative here and see if we can come up with possibilities for focus, calm, challenge, and change that fit into the stress and challenge aspect. Does anyone have any sense of how this congregation may have called on these elements during times of stress and challenge? Yes.
I would suggest that perhaps being willing to hear both sides would be a calm characteristic.
I would echo that with conversation and staying connected, which has been in my experience here, part of these recent weeks, that communication and staying connected with one another. And you're right, that's an aspect of calm. Christy?
I would say that we have stayed focused on our core values and our mission and who we are in the midst of stress and challenge. And we were able to continue to move forward and be the people that we've decided and the mission that God has called us to be.
And you know, that's so great, because over here someone talked about who and whose we are as part of that stress and challenge time. And what a wonderful thing to be able to say that you're functioning during times of stress, that groundedness. Okay.
I think we're hopeful. I don't think we lose our hopefulness through the challenges that we have.
Okay?
I think that's very good.
Do you think you pull together in different ways during times of stress and challenge than you do when you're trying to plan a celebration? Is it more inclusive, or is it, do you take sides? No, it's tough, I shouldn't have done
I think people talk about it.
it. Okay.
Joan, I look at what's happening today and the number of people that are involved in 40 Days of Purpose, and we're in stress, and I would say spiritual growth is a key element of maybe that's going back to your basics and going back to your core, but when you're under stress, but it appears to be there.
That really dovetails with what Christy said about focusing on core values and mission. But that spiritual groundedness, that spiritual growth, when we're in churches that have intractable conflict, they have reached a point where it's not going to get better. Eventually the congregation will be better, but the relationship has been broken between pastor and congregation. That intractable conflict. One of the first things that I like to do is talk about that groundedness, that prayer life, praying for one another, studying together. And yes, we do use Rick Warren's book, Purpose-Driven Life. When people are in that level of conflict in their churches, they are so hung up on the meetings and the documents and the signatures here and the signatures there and who's doing what when, that they've forgotten why they belong to a church. That focus, that core value, the reason they gather gets lost in the conflict. And this particular congregation, and at least in my experience, but Ted and I were talking about this earlier today, your desire for discipleship, growth, prayer, spiritual groundedness is not typical of the churches in our synod. And it's pretty exciting for us. You know, as outsiders being invited in temporarily, it is exciting to be part of a group that has that desire to reach out, to serve, to grow, to learn. And so for me, I see that spiritual growth and that focus as part of your functioning under times of stress. Many churches under stress and in transition, their attendance drops way down. People do not come to church. The activities take a break. It's kind of like you're in a holding pattern for 6 months, 8 months, whatever it takes before that call committee is up and running. That has not been the behavior or the functioning that has been shown to us. Any additional comments on that? That was a reaction. You know, it's like a child falls down and they skin their knee and they cry. But if they're resilient, once the Band-Aid's on, they're back to playing. So that initial reaction, to me, is a behavior, habit, a trend. The functioning is that deeper stuff. Can you be resilient? Can you get up again? Can you go on with the game? And the fact that worship has continued, programs are continuing, it's vibrant here. That's that functioning aspect. So I don't want to pick too much on polarization as being part of how you function. Because quite honestly, when I look at your history, there's been a lot of pain there. But you had a lot more celebrations across that back wall than focus on pain. So again, what does it say about how we function? Pretty well.
Well, that's the one word I would have added under there too. I was thinking that before you mentioned it, is resiliency. I've been here about 10 years, and I think this congregation is extremely resilient.
Well, that's your next discussion question.
And there's so
and I
many-
did not plan her back there. How did your resiliency create your functioning patterns? Talk to one another. We're going to move these and put up fresh paper. How did your resiliency allow you to function this way?
History, and they are forward thinking instead of maintenance thinking. And like I say, maybe Sonia and I are a fluke, but we don't really belong here at a time of conflict like this, or transition or change. That's not normal. So.
And I would say being forward thinking is a key sign of
resilience.
resilience. Oh, I hope I spelled that right. Close. Okay, so some signs of that resiliency, being forward thinking. You guys have done a lot of great work. You should be able to come up with several things that point to resiliency. Yes?
I think resiliency goes hand in hand with faith. And I think we're a strong, faith-based congregation.
Absolutely.
Long-term commitment too. That's what I see so much of here is the people, long-term time members that have just stuck with it for years and years.
I think it's directly related to leadership too.
I think there's a lot of open-minded thinking here, that, people listen to new ideas.
Maybe it's the same as that one, willingness to change.
There has to be give and take. People will have to give up some of their power as leaders sometimes.
What else? How about the way we, I'm trying to take you somewhere. I know the answer I want. How about the way that we stay connected with one another even when we disagree?
Well, I think there's a mutual respect going on.
Thank you. That's one of the words I wanted.
She's a plant, right? That's two answers.
Let's see.
Suspicion.
These are all signs of resiliency.
Scary.
We have a lot of people, I don't know if I can say this in a word, but it seems to me there's a lot of people in this congregation that in the absence of a single leader, say, really know how to pitch in, help out, serve, and be leaders, or temporary or semi-permanent leaders.
Oh, I wrote team players.
Yeah.
Stepping to the plate.
But yeah.
Yes, it is different than leaders. But when people step to the plate,
But there are many leaders in
they
this
become
congregation.
leaders.
Yeah.
Just to expand on that involvement. Willingness to be involved.
I don't know how it fits in, but the fact that we're here, wanting what we want, what we as the church want, rather than, as a group, rather than just what one person said we're gonna do.
Okay. Desire for help?
Being vision-based.
Think of some foundational aspects of being Trinity Lutheran Church. What foundational aspects give you this resiliency that you need?
Grace.
Christ. Faith.
Forgiving.
Respect, receive,
Reconciliation.
You guys did that really well. Anything else that adds to your resiliency, allows you to bounce back, allows you to come together?
Passion.
Passion.
I think the size lends itself to the
Firm
resilience.
foundation.
Common beliefs.
Unconditional love.
accepted, acceptance. Yeah.
John, they pretty well have got all the core values.
That's what I
up
said,
there.
these are our core values, aren't they?
I'm looking at
Our
them.
core values.
So your core values and your bedrock beliefs, were you able to use those to shore up your resiliency during times of stress?
Absolutely.
So what does that say about this church's resiliency? I know your focus shifted to the problems of the time, but where did your focus settle? Your focus went back to that
Core value.
forward thinking, but it went back to,
First one.
it's this one too. It went back to where you want to go. You were able to, when we're resilient, we can let go of all of those things that get us into that divisive, blaming, scapegoating, making excuses, enabling one another. Those behaviors, those reactive things we do in the heat and height of conflicted times can tear a church apart if you stay there. If our behavior is the same as how we function, we get stuck. When we look at the history here over all those years, you never got stuck. You had stuff that happened, but we all have stuff that happens. You didn't get stuck. Probably the one thing that came up over and over, well, there were three, but one of the things that came up over and over again that was problematic was that fuzzy line between confidentiality and secrecy. Because it hurt your climate, it hurt your culture. It hurt your ability to be resilient and all be of one as you were moving forward. Because remember, when we set up a climate of secrecy, we have insiders and outsiders. We aren't a group with long-term commitments of helping leaders looking forward. That was difficult. That's something to look at as we move forward. One of the other elements that showed up repeatedly was too much power being held in a single office. And again, that is something that this congregation has a great deal of control over as you move into your next settled ministry. Now, there are so many options. One of the, I use a book that I sent down to Ted so he could take a look at it, but even just looking at aspects of personnel, mutual ministry, different ways to funnel some of our concerns and cares and our celebrations of one another, but different ways to handle that so it doesn't all funnel through a single office. You know, those are options this church has if it's creative and resilient and looking to the future in a healthy way. Okay, your next, I'm going to have you do another fun one, which is, how can your faith be the force behind your creativity and resiliency? How can you use your faith to be the force behind your creativity as you move forward and your resiliency? Let's put up another sheet of paper. How does our faith become a force behind our creativity and our resiliency as we look towards some of our issues that we have? And the issues that, you know, the ones that really, how did I do that? I thought I did that. I didn't do a report for you guys, did I? Well, you don't have it, so I didn't do it. Okay, usually I look at 3 or 4, 2 or 3 things that just kind of, you know, if you're looking at the big picture, they keep rising up and bubbling up to the surface. And I was talking like you all had that in writing, but you don't, because you didn't do that. One was the secrecy. One was the power of the office. And that can be any office.
What was the third one?
Yeah.
What are the offices you're talking about?
Bishop, pastor, you know, anytime a single person has too much power. Because remember, in a business, when we hire and fire, it's a for-profit business and we make those business decisions. But in a congregation, and really in most of our nonprofits, all of you extend the call. Okay, so when you have called people, that decision-making process is more than just one person saying, I don't get along with this person anymore, they're gone. So to be healthy, we have to have a healthier process. Does that mean we keep people on board that are not functioning properly or appropriately in their position? No. But the process needs to be healthier so that we have more resiliency when we are dealing with those decisions.
Within this church, what do you consider the different offices?
Well, the difficulty that rose up in your history was the pastoral office having a great deal of power and control. Hiring and firing being pretty high on that list, without like human resources or personnel committees to assist in that. Now, that doesn't mean to say that somebody new coming in, and because you're in transition, I almost hesitate to say this, but in many synods, there is no option for the rostered people, the called people on staff. When a new senior pastor comes, one of our pastors just moved to a new congregation. In that synod, the associate could stay for 30 days after he arrived. The one he went to. That was in North Dakota. In the synod that we are in, there is more grace in that, but the expectation is that the senior pastor who is called can choose their staff in terms of rostered people, okay? But every synod does this a little bit differently. Sometimes the secretary who's been in the church maybe doesn't get along with the pastor who's called, and they mutually decide that they will make a change. But usually that will go through some type of a personnel procedure. It won't be someone saying, this isn't working, you're done. And this congregation has given that kind of power to the office of pastor. And there has been some pain.
Is that common in our?
Well, I don't know about your, because I've never asked that question. Just today I said to Ted, we need to find out what the practice is in this synod. But in your particular congregation, there has been pain experienced by an individual saying, I can't work with this individual, or when, and I'm gonna miss your dad's name again, I can never remember what they call it. Herky. Okay, I always want to say something.
I got a couple names for him, but if you
He was a much loved long-term pastor here. An associate came that was taking a different path, and enough power was exerted that he went into an early retirement because the power was given to Pastor Halberdier. You know, then there were some difficulties with the organist leader. Not that these things are right, wrong, white, black, good, bad. I'm not putting judgment on them. But your history has pain in those kinds of decisions because they were not the decisions of the congregation.
Who determines what the power of the pastoral office is?
Your constitution probably gives you a real good insight into that. Yes.
But doesn't some of this go back in the Missouri Synod
Yes.
anyway?
Yes,
So that
that's
the
part of your
pastor-
history.
The pastor was the control
Yep.
person.
And that's part of your history. That's part of the climate that has shaped you over time. But as we look at, the faith of this congregation, the good people who worship and share leadership here, the things that seem to be problems in your past that have hurt you, have been painful for you as a body. The secrecy which showed up over and over again, setting up a climate of insiders and outsiders, confusing confidentiality with secrecy. When we're not sure, we have a tendency to take everything and say it's confidential. But everything isn't confidential. The facts of whatever has happened, those can be shared. If they're part of a public document, if they're part of a written anything that is filed in the office that is not a confidential document, all can know that. It's your congregation. So you've been hurt by secrecy and the confusion between that and confidentiality. You've been hurt by too much power being put in one place, where decisions were made, kind of a unilateral decisions. And where this showed up, in terms of the pastoral office, was with Paul's dad, sort of being forced into that early retirement. Very little was said when we talked about Pastor Halberdier, other than that was when the organist had his sad dismissal by his things being on his doorstep. But as we talked about Pastor Argoing's time here, it was really towards the end of his ministry here that there seemed to be some unilateral decisions made and perhaps the power of the office. Maybe more power was given to him than you intended. It doesn't matter anymore because it's part of your history. But you were hurt by it, and being forward-looking people, it's important for us to learn from what has hurt us. And then Paul, following Pastor Argoing, was given that same level of power.
Are you saying then that we should have a committee? I don't know.
Well,
Somebody needs to be in charge.
Often, you're right. Oh, of course, but often, healthy congregations very often have a personnel committee that is there to handle issues of compensation, just the issues of the staff itself. Now, that does not mean that, people who work as a team don't work as a team anymore unless they go through the committee. But the personnel committee can handle some of those questions of insurance, just HR kind of things. But mutual ministry then provides us another avenue where when there is difficulty working in the process, in the staff, we have a place where we can funnel those things and they become part of our growing edge, rather than one person having a problem with another person and it's secret and it's done. It just protects all of you. And that's a pretty standard part of how we function. Now, one thing that the model constitution says, our ELCA model constitution, is that in the absence of a mutual ministry committee, that can be handled by your executive committee. But what if part of the problem is that you have given too much power to the office of pastor, and he sits on the executive committee? Where does somebody go who is terribly hurt by what's happening? It's hard for that executive committee in a church this size to be an open-minded, communicating piece that allows you to keep your resiliency. In a very small church where you have limited individuals involved, it's more of a family concept, and they have a little easier time substituting the executive committee for the mutual ministry committee.
Yeah, you quickly popped up the word mutual ministry. It might take a little bit of time to describe what it could be.
It takes on different meanings in different places. Typically, it is a small group of people who are not in any other leadership roles. They're not on the council, they're not committee chairs, they are simply good listeners who love their church. And they provide a venue, a filter, a funnel, whatever you want to call it, for both congregational members to talk about concerns and for staff members to be able to talk about their own concerns and own growing edges. It's that wonderful kind of a safety net that allows people to have the freedom to talk through how they might handle something that is a difficult piece for them in their employment or in their relationship with the pastor or a staff member, however, whatever the issue at that moment might be. And because they do not have a stake in the council or committee chair or some other area, they can listen, we hope, in an open-minded way.
And how many are usually?
3 to 5. It's usually quite small. And in some churches, everybody does it differently. But in some situations, they simply come up with those names by taking names from the congregation as to trusted individuals who they feel would be a good support for the staff in a ministry situation. It is counterproductive to have your pastor or some other staff person hand-pick. Because then it defeats that whole purpose of trying to, trying to spread that out and create the healthiest environment possible. The personnel committee is a little bit different in that they would handle issues of monetary concern, how the budget and salaries and benefits would fit into that. Let's say the budget is really tight, so instead of moving up to the next level on guidelines, we're going to talk about one more Sunday off or whatever. That's where those things would be worked out, not in the mutual ministry. Did you have more you want to say about that?
2 words that come to my mind is that an effective mutual ministry committee will have support available, will be supportive. Not blind support, not stand up and fight for, this person. So it's supportive, and it's also challenging.
It provides these same elements. It works with the staff so they can keep their focus. They provide calm and challenge and help individual staff members that may need to change some part of their functioning, this would be the group that would be support for that. You know, if I'm finding I am always working with a high level of anxiety and can't seem to focus on strengths and I'm only focusing on weaknesses, that mutual ministry committee might be the group that says, can we reframe this? Can we start looking at really positive aspects? And that is a wonderful gift to someone who is having a hard time valuing their own contributions to the staff. And sometimes that happens, where you have a staff person who feels like they can't do anything right. Mutual ministry might help them reframe that, so they can see the positive aspects of what they bring to the mix. And of course you want diversity, you don't want everyone on your staff to be the same and do the same, and you want that mix. But it isn't easy to day in and day out see the positive things that you bring to the congregation when you're tired, when you're anxious, when you're overworked or overbusy or overwhelmed. It just, sometimes we have days where it's hard to do that. And it's great to have a group that you can go to when you're in one of those positions.
Can you
Yes.
just move on to your third?
You bet.
your third
Okay,
one?
what was the third? Secrecy, power of the office.
No, does it have?
That'll be next time.
No, what?
The independence?
No.
No?
I think that the other piece that concerned me was the continual change of staff.
So the rapid.
Yeah, rapid change. So if we're looking at secrecy, which goes way back, difficulty with the power of the office, which goes way back, and then really in your whole history you only have that one really long ministry, which for a church this size is slightly unusual. You had rather quick turnarounds. How does your faith become the force behind creativity and resiliency to deal with these three issues? How does faith help us be creative and resilient in dealing with those issues? So we went on a whole nother tangent after we talked about faith and resiliency. Do you remember what you came up with before? Or do you want another minute to talk?
We use the words,
Okay.
just real quick, let go and let God. I mean,
Okay.
that's something we've been saying, but, yeah, that you just sometimes have to put your trust and faith in God when things are challenging.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, one of the gifts of the Spirit is imagination. For imagination. Come up with creative, think, you know.
And when leaders are anxious, they lose their resiliency, they lose their creativity, and they have a very difficult time with imagination. So that's one of the pitfalls for us when we fall into an anxiety position.
I would add to that, let go, let God, and that is understand God. We still need major discipleship in this congregation. You gave us a lot of kudos, but we still need more.
But you're all here because you have discipleship at the level you have, rather than being at someplace else where everything is run just as a business, where there's not that challenge to serve, to grow, to be spiritually grounded. So maybe I gave too many kudos for you,
No.
but
I think to that point, we're here, but there's also a whole lot of people that aren't.
right. Mhm.
So
And then-
you can
right.
look at that in a couple different ways.
And in a healthy congregation, it is all about relationships. And yes, it's their relationship with God, but it's also our relationships with one another in that family of faith. And we're the ones that have the power to change that inclusiveness by relating to one another. I mean, we get right down to it, all that matters is relationship. Our relationship between, with our Lord and Savior, and our relationship with one another under that wonderful and glorious umbrella. So that's, that fits in there too. What else? How else does our faith let us deal with some of these issues? I mean, our faith understanding that gives us the resiliency, the creativity, allows us to function in a healthy way, will help us with these things that have hurt us. But it's our faith that's the foundation. What else can we draw on?
Faith makes us family.
Okay. It's too late, I'm making you all tired. What's the most powerful thing we can do for one another? And because we're people, and because we are who we are, we do not always pray for one another every day. I mean, that's just, and it's such a hard challenge, but it's such an important part of our resiliency, is that ability to hold one another in prayer, in that mutual respect, staying connected. We aren't all going to agree on everything. We might have to agree we disagree. But we still have prayer as our most powerful support of one another.
You might want to add one another to that word prayer, as opposed to kind of the personal me and God thing, but rather to be practical and mindful of others.
What else do we do together that makes us family? What does worship do for us? Do we come because we have to? What does it do for us?
Unites us.
Renews us, unites us,
Gives us strength.
strengthens us. And it takes us back to that, makes us family, makes us one. Can we keep growing in creativity and resiliency as a church without faith? Where does hopefulness fit in there?
Hopefulness is faith.
You got it. What's that other phrase I ended up writing a second time? That's also part of your faith.
Faith gave us the courage to face our difficulties.
Absolutely. The connection of faith and courage. Being forward, thinking, moving, looking. That's also part of your faith. You stepped out in faith. Moving forward with program and decisions and life and growth together during a difficult time. And you've done that all through your history. There just was not a time when we talked about history where people said, oh, why didn't we just shut the doors then? It just didn't happen. Kathy.
I was gonna say, I hope it enables us to repent too.
Okay.
Change, so that we can move away from from those bad habits there. Take care of them.
And remember, these are not things that you did that were wrong. That is so key. You know, when we looked at things way back, it was kind of amusing and kind of interesting and fun. Closer we got to the present, the more difficult it was, because it's really painful. You know, if we had been having this very same discussion at the time that the orphan is having stuff dumped on his doorstep, we wouldn't have been laughing about it. But because it was part of the history, we weren't laughing at the situation, but it was like, you know, that disbelief. Well, as we get closer to the present and the difficulties of now, it really did become more painful. But it's so important to recognize that nobody did anything wrong here. We had a culture, a climate that allowed certain things to happen because of lack of clarity. It does not mean that, you know, we had bad leadership, that we called the wrong people. We're not blaming. That's not what our job is. Our job is to step forward in faith, being creative, being resilient, and looking at creative and resilient ways to handle some of our problems that have been repeated. You know, how can we better handle secrecy? Better communication, more clarity, understanding where confidentiality ends and secrecy begins. Is it a challenge? Yes. But can we work on it? Of course. That's part of that creative and resilient approach to that. You know, being creative and resilient in terms of the power of the office. You know, maybe this particular council is going to look at personnel or mutual ministry or some other venue to handle some of the situations that occur when you have a large staff. That's a creative and resilient way of addressing that. The continuous change or the rapid change of staff, often that is out of your control. You know, people come and go. That can be out of your control. But when we look at numbers of 12 or more people leaving in 1 year, it bounces back to, can we have committees that support conversation, help, wholeness, health, so that we don't have that kind of revolving door on some of our ministries. They really do all tie together. And our faith is what allows us to continue being creative and being resilient. Our faith is what allows us to pray for one another, to be mindful, to worship together, to become one body. This is not what your vision, your bedrock beliefs, all of those are important aspects. But for us to be healthy, it comes down to relationship. It comes down to our relationship with God and how we connect with one another. That is really a key piece. Any questions? It is 9:30. You've all been here for a long time. David.
I comment, at the risk of drawing it out another minute or two. But
You can draw it out.
The faith piece, how does it affect those kinds of issues, and how can we move forward from here? It seems as if the vertical, our relationship with God, does have, and our faith in Him, has a direct bearing on the horizontal, our relationship with each other. What leads to secrecy on a horizontal level? Well, mistakes are made, things are done that are inappropriate. What is the human tendency is to cover it up. But if we have faith in the grace of God, in the forgiveness of God, then we can hold those things out, even the things we're not real proud of. And God's forgiveness covers that. We forgive one another, and we can move on from it. We don't have to nail somebody else to the cross. Jesus has already done that. So we can then go forward from that and not have to feel as if, oh my goodness, if we don't hide this, there's going to be terrible judgment and blame and literally hell to pay for somebody or some group. But that faith in God's grace gives us the freedom to move beyond secrecy. The freedom, I think, of faith in the power of the office. Well, how did Jesus demonstrate and model power. He said, I came not to be served, but to serve. So the power of Jesus was in his servant ministry. So if our faith in Jesus as servant then empowers us to look upon power as a way to serve other people, not to protect turf or control. And the power that Jesus gives us again, he authorizes us to forgive each other and empower each other for the work that he's given us to do. That's where the power comes in. It's a power that goes from one person to another, not held by a person for their own sake. And I think another aspect of the change of staff is if we are staff-driven and we say, well, they're doing the ministry, we're paying them and they do it, that fails to take into consideration that our faith in God is also his faith in us. That is, he has empowered and authorized us to, each one of us, all of us are ministers. And we are to do the ministry. These great staff we have equip and empower us to do what God has called us to do. And so we're not loading too much on the staff as if they're the ones who are called to do ministry and we sit on the sidelines cheering them on. So those are thoughts I had as I was thinking about how does faith relate directly to our functioning, with and for each other.
And you're so correct, because the hardest thing for us to do is get, like when we've made a mistake, is get it out on the table. Our dread of that is worse than the discussion. And when we have that openness and clarity, and understand and accept God's grace, we can move on. And that's that wonderful gift that is there for all of us. And in healthy congregations, and I do this all the time, I always say, oh, the pastors don't matter. They come and go. It is all about the congregation. The congregation, just as he said, you are the ones that minister to one another. That's where all of these wonderful aspects of faith, supporting your resiliency and your creativity, when these are lived out in healthy relationships with one another, your resiliency just goes way up. And when we're resilient, we handle those bumps in the road really, really well. And the fact that you all have great bedrock beliefs and really worked hard on focus, does that mean you will always keep your focus? No. But at least you know each other well enough and can relate well enough to remind one another where that focus is. Any other comments before we go? Can we stand and say the Lord's Prayer? I know we did it in church.
Yeah, for a second.
You decide.